Affairs to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the so-called unified contract of the Saudi National Recruitment Committee or SANARCOM, the provisions of which are claimed to be violative of many Philippine laws and will be detrimental to the welfare and security of our overseas workers in Saudi Arabia, by Senator Loren Legarda.
Foreign Relations, Labor, Employment, and Human Resource Development.
Yes, Resolution number 572, resolution directing the Senate Committee on Public Works and other appropriate Senate committees to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation into the obvious, unequal, and uneven privileges and benefits granted to and enjoyed by foreign contractors in the matter of pre-qualification and award of contract for foreign assisted infrastructure projects and for other purposes, by Senator Revilla.
To the Committee on Public Works.
Committee report number 153, submitted jointly by the Committees on Local Government and Constitutional Amendments, Revision of Codes and Laws, on House number 3761, introduced by Representative Sumulong, entitled An Act Amending Section 55 of Republic Act number 8508, entitled An Act Converting the Municipality of Antipolo into a component city to be known as the City of Antipolo, and appropriating funds therefore, recommending its approval with amendments to sponsor Senators Barbers and Angara.
Committee to the calendar for ordinary business.
Mr. President, on a point of personal and collective privilege, I move to recognize Senator Panfilo Lacson.
Senator Lacson is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise today on a question of personal and collective privilege. Last week, we passed the Senate version of the General Appropriations Bill of 2003. No less than the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, our colleague Senator Villar, and principal sponsor of the bill, aptly described the 2003 budget as bare bones, thus appealing to his colleagues to contribute their share to arrest the projected budget deficit, which our economic managers estimate to hit the 300 billion peso mark by year-end. I now answer the call. I call for the scrapping of a very corrupt and corrupting system in our political institutions. All I ask are a few minutes of your precious time and of your mind. We now must move to abolish the pork barrel system. We must see its end during our watch without need to mourn its loss. It's a virus of corruption that must die, and there is no better hole on the space on earth to make it happen than the Senate. Expectedly, a place of men and women with mature age, with honor, with dignity, with integrity. Further, there is no better time to declare its end than now, when our country's budget deficit is at an alarmingly uncontrollable pace. For the past year, it was 213 billion pesos. Of course, we do not believe the numbers. One thing I may say is apodictic. It is still counting. There's nothing in the pork barrel system that gives us pride. There's only everything that makes us hide in shame. It should not matter anymore under what name the system sounds, be it the Countrywide Development Fund, or the Congressional Initiative Allocation, or the Priority Development Assistance Fund. It is and will remain to be a fund of compulsive corruption. The name itself traces its origin to the pre-Civil War days in the United States, when, in periodic fits of generosity, white masters would give their black slaves salted pork in barrels. More often than not, the eagerness of the slaves would result in ugly shoving and rushing to grab more pork than the others. The more pork one could grab for himself, the more triumphant he would appear than the others, who were meek and reluctant. We may not realize it, Mr. President, but the Filipino people would sometimes see us behave like Negro slaves rushing to the pork barrel. A critic has a worse description, that of swines rushing to get more slabs than they can consume. Mr. President, our countrymen expect to see every peso of their taxes wisely spent on every project. They become profoundly disillusioned every time they are robbed of it. Let me say now what they hate to hear, but they must hear what we have been afraid to say. Under the pork barrel system, only less than half of the taxpayers' money actually goes to the programs of work. More than half habitually goes to the pockets of corruption. Occasionally, depending on the insatiability of the corrupt, a shameful 20% of the fund is left to finance the project. Holy mackerel. We can pretend all day not to know, but the Filipino people have never been stupid not to see through such pretense. Let me give the breakdown. It is nasty. 2% goes to the Commission on Audit as SOP. 10% is given to the district engineer and other officials of the Department of Public Works and Highways. 2% is passed on to the barangay chairman. 14% goes to the contractor. 10% in profit and 4% as value-added tax. Thank God. 5 to 10% if the mayor or governor so demands. And hold your breath, 20% of project cost is earmarked for the legislator who identifies the project. Shares sometimes vary depending on greed. Even the billboards that advertise the proponents of infrastructure projects are overpriced. Legislators who allocate funds for the purchase of medicines and other pharmaceutical products, as well as school supplies, get bigger takes. By how much, Mr. President? Some suppliers say it is from here to eternity. In a book published in 1998 by the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism entitled Pork and Other Perks, the authors wrote about vivid accounts of actual payoffs involving legislators. Thus, a payoff usually takes place inside the offices of legislators. The more sophisticated ones prefer hotel rooms and restaurants. Sulu Hotel in Quezon City is said to be a favorite. Congress insiders and suppliers say some legislators prefer having the payments routed through third parties, but others apparently have no qualms about accepting the commissions themselves. One supplier recounted handing over the commission to a legislator in one corner of the corridor just outside his Batasan office. Pork barrel every year runs to billions of pesos. I hate to say it, the people hate to hear it, but they lose billions of pesos anyway. They lose these billions to the many deep pockets of corruption. Mr. President, my esteemed colleagues, there is no saying here that every senator or congressman is corrupt. It is only to say that we have all become suspects. The public has every basis and right to suspect, and we seem not to mind anymore. Mr. President, those with clear conscience among us do not need to rage. They only need to help those without it. In this regard, may I take this opportunity to thank the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee and some of our colleagues who have expressed support to this advocacy. One colleague, Senator Joker Arroyo, has done something truly admirable. He had not allocated a single centavo from his pork barrel allocation for the past year. However, I cannot help but wonder how his 200 million pesos pork was realigned, since it was part and parcel of the 2002 General Appropriations Act. That is the reason why I want my allocation this year deducted from the proposed 2003 GAA. I have an unsolicited advice to the distinguished gentleman from Makati and the Bicol region. Why not slash the 2003 national budget by 211 million pesos more? To all of us in this august chamber, maybe we can help alleviate the bludgeoning budget deficit by waiving our 2003 pork barrel fund allocations. We can actually do our share, no matter how small, in balancing the budget by doing just that. With 23 senators at 200 million pesos each, 4,853 million pesos will automatically be deducted from the 2003 national budget. The Speaker of the House, Jose de Venecia, can equally display his statesmanship by doing the same in the lower house, with more than 200 congressmen at 65 million each. That would be another 13 billion pesos at least. Let us be the first to sacrifice for the sake of tiding us over a financial nightmare. I therefore call on the Senate and the House of Representatives to voluntarily give up the pork. Mr. President, it is a simple choice between self-respect and self-aggrandizement. That is exactly my point. Those among us whose hands remain untainted and unsoiled by the fruits of corruption from the evil pork must now be insulated from the temptation it may bring upon us. How? Let us try scrapping the pork. There is life without it. We all know who we are and what we are on this issue. That is one thing we are all sure about. Mine are not speculations. I definitely have my own sources. The figures I brought out earlier are never a figment of my imagination. If the pork barrel stinks, how much longer must we suffer the stench? I believe it is time to abolish it altogether. Mr. President, we were elected by the Filipino people to make good laws for the common good and never to make gold under the pork barrel system. We are here to make laws, not to build roads and bridges. We were voted into office to provide check and balance under the principle of separation of powers and not to accept fat checks to enhance our bank account balance. Former French President and Prime Minister, the late Jean Raymond Pompidou, was correct. There's a whale of difference between a politician and a statesman. He said, while a statesman places himself at the service of the nation, a politician places the nation at his own personal service. With the pork barrel system, we are all perceived as dirty, corrupt, and greedy politicians. Without it, we can all become better statesmen and public servants. Whenever our committees investigate anomalies in government, does it not occur to us how equally guilty they think the legislators could be? Mr. President, pardon my asking. There are all kinds of arguments to defend the pork. Its advocates invent new methods and formulas to make every legislator happy. Ironically, in the mind of every Filipino, they are all mad and madly corrupted by it. I know that the pork barrel system has never been legally flawed. In fact, the Supreme Court has ruled on its constitutionality. But the Supreme Court never ruled that scrapping the pork barrel system would be unconstitutional either. I can only hope the Senate leadership will take a serious look at this proposal and not simply toss it to the dust heap of the Philippine Senate history. I am sure to lose some friends and create more enemies in this 12th Congress. I am sure skeptics will taunt me and the cynics will mock me without end. I remember Bayan Muna Party List Representative Crispin Beltran, who declared the lowest asset in the lower house at 81,000 pesos, said in a media interview immediately after my position on the pork barrel issue first came out. And I quote, "Mabuti pa si Lacson at may ibang pinagkakakitaan na illegal. Paano naman kami na sa pork barrel lamang umaasa?" Realizing that what he said was an instant giveaway, he paused and started to stutter. Another congressman commented that this representation would not need to make money from the pork barrel because supposedly I have a lot in some foreign banks. Mr. President, if only to satisfy Congressman Crispin Beltran and my other detractors' inquisitive minds, wala po akong pinagkakakitaang illegal at lalong wala akong deposito sa bangko sa labas ng bansa. Mr. President, if this is my misfortune, so be it. It is not the one I cannot possibly learn to live with. Mr. President, I derive no pleasure in telling what I have told. I am sure many colleagues derive no pleasure in hearing what they just heard. But the people surely hate what they already know about. It is time to bring the pork barrel system down, or we all go down under. We can surely live without pork. Certainly, there is life without it. Thank you very much.
Majority Leader. With the permission of the Chamber, we declare a 1-minute suspension. Nasaan na si Majority Leader?
Wala na eh. We're ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Yes, Mr. President, after conferring with some of our colleagues on the agenda for today, Mr. President, we have been informed that more than half of the members of the Senate are members also of the bicameral conference committee for the budget. We are rushing